Everglades Forever, Restoring America's Great Wetland by Trish Marks, photography by Cindy Karp. Essential question: what reasons do people have for protecting the environment? In Homestead, Florida, the students in Miss Stone's 5th grade class have been learning about the Everglades, a vast natural wetland located on the southern tip of Florida. Since 2000, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan has helped to preserve this wetland and its natural water system. Now, all of Miss Stone's students are visiting the Everglades to experience this amazing place and learn what they can do to preserve it. The map on the right shows where Everglades National Park is located in Florida and the area Miss Stone's class explored. On the morning of the field trip, the bus traveled from the Avocado School. The students saw the landscape change from houses and shopping centers to a flat, grassy prairie that met the horizon miles away. Soon they arrived at the Royal Palm Visitor Center, part of Everglades National Park. Ms. Stone had arranged for the class to meet Ranger Jim at the visitor center. From there, the ranger led them to the start of the Ashinga Trail, a boardwalk circling into a slough. It was the dry season, which lasts from December through April, so the water levels were low. But there is a deep part of the slough at the beginning of the trail that never dries up. Around the edge of this part, large water birds called anhingas sun their wings. Anhingas hold out their wings to thermoregulate, or regulate their body temperature by soaking up the sun's energy to keep their bodies warm. An osprey, a fish-eating hawk, waited in a tree for a flash of fish in the water. In the distance, an egret stood on the sawgrass, and a flock of endangered wood storks flew overhead. Right now, you'll see many animals close together around the deeper water areas, said Ranger Jim. Fish and smaller water animals had migrated to the deep water areas to search for food. Wading birds, alligators, ospreys, and cormorants, large diving birds with bright green eyes, followed to feed on the fish and smaller animals. Alligators also use their tails, snouts, and feet to dig deep holes which fill with water. These holes are places for alligators to cool off while they wait for a meal of the small animals that are attracted to the water-filled holes. During the wet season, which lasts from May through November, water covers much of the land. Then the animals spread out, because the water that carries their food is spread out. The Everglades has wet and dry seasons, but it also has wetter and drier areas caused by how high the land is above the water level. Even a few inches of elevation can make a difference in how wet or dry the soil remains throughout the year. These differences in moisture help create unique habitats, each with its own special set of plants and animals. One of the lowest Everglades habitats is the mangrove swamp, which is named for the mangrove trees that line the islands and bays leading into the ocean. Fresh rainwater flows toward these areas and mixes with the salty ocean water, making the water in mangrove swamps brackish. The mangrove trees have specially adapted roots and leaves so they can live in this salty, muddy water. The swamps also serve as nurseries for shrimp, bonefish, and other marine animals that need a protected place to grow before they head to the ocean. If the brackish water in mangrove swamps changes, these animals cannot survive. Since two goals of the restoration plan are to allow Everglades water to flow more naturally to the ocean and to regulate the amount of fresh water flowing during each season, animals of the mangrove swamps, including pelicans, sea turtles, and the endangered American crocodiles and manatees, will be helped to survive. The class was too far from the ocean to see a mangrove swamp, but as they walked the Anhinga Trail, the students saw several of the Everglades habitats. The slough filled with slow-moving water stretched in the distance. A sawgrass prairie covered the shallow parts of the slough, and in the distance, the rounded domes of hardwood hammocks rose above the surface of the water. As the students came to the end of the Anhinga Trail, Ranger Jim pointed out a gumbo limbo tree. It's called a tourist tree, he said, because of the bark of the tree peels off, just like the skin of sunburned tourists. Then he directed the students back to the bus for a short ride to a pine forest called the Pinelands. Ranger Jim took the class on a hike through the pinelands one of the driest habitats in the Everglades. The sunlight filtered through the trees. Everything was quieter than on the Anhinga Trail. The floor of the pinelands is covered with cabbage palms, mulberry bushes, blue porter flowers, and other vegetation that help absorb sounds from the outside world. This is where you'll find solution holes, Miss Stone told the students. They searched the forest for large holes that have been carved out of the limestone by tannic acid, a chemical formed when rainwater mixes with the pine needles and other leaves in the forest. Small animals live, feed, and raise their young in the solution holes. The students also watched as the tiny yellow tree snail nestled under the bark of a tree, eating a growth on the tree called lichen. They saw a red-shouldered hawk swirl in the sky, and they waited for a golden orb spider to catch its next meal in its web close to the ground. As they walked through the pinelands, the students talked with Miss Stone and Ranger Jim about the circle of life, the Miccosukee belief that all plant and animal and human life is connected. They had seen this today in the habitats they visited. The students also realized how terrible it would be if the habitats in this part of the Everglades were not protected from the effects of farming and development that were still putting the Everglades in danger. What would happen to all the unique plants and animals they had seen? Ranger Jim said they could help by conserving water even when brushing their teeth or washing their faces, because most of the water used in southern Florida comes from the Everglades. With responsible water conservation, the Everglades Restoration Plan could, over the next 30 years, restore a healthy balance to all living things. Plants, animals, and people will be able to live side by side in the only Pahehoki grassy river in the world. It was the end of a long day for the class, but there was one more part of the Everglades to visit. Miss Stone and Ranger Jim led the students into an open space hidden at the end of the hiking trail. This is a finger glade, Miss Stone said. It's a small part of the sawgrass prairie that does not stay wet all year. During the wet season, the finger glade will be filled with water and fish. But now, the ground, which is higher than the larger sawgrass prairies, was dry and hard. For a few minutes, you can walk as far as you like and enjoy the finger glade, said Miss Stone. The students fanned out. Some pretended they were birds flying low overhead. Others studied the sawgrass, pretending to be explorers discovering the glade. Still others talked about how the hard ground on which they were walking would turn into a lake deep enough for fish to swim through during the wet season. And some just lay on their backs looking at the sky and the ring of trees around the glade. When the students came back, they sat in a circle close to Miss Stone. "Close your eyes," said Miss Stone, "and listen. Do you hear cars?" she whispered. "Do you hear sirens? Do you hear people? What do you hear?" "Silence." "You are not going to find silence like this anyplace else in the world," Miss Stone said quietly. "This glade is protected by a circle of trees and marshes and natural wildlife. It is far from the noise of the outside world. It is full of silence. Anytime you are in a sawgrass prairie like this one, stop and listen to the silence." The sun was setting over the Everglades as the class walked back to the bus. Birds flew low over the sawgrass prairie. It was a peaceful time, a time for everything to settle down for the night. The students knew that for the near future the Everglades would look the same and might even be almost the same. They also knew about the dangers facing the Everglades and that it would not stay the same unless people watched over it and took care of it. Restoring the Everglades will take a long time and it may never be finished, but the students knew they could play a part as they grew older. They had learned that they too were a part of the Everglades, connected in the same circle of life with the tiniest insect and largest alligator. They knew that someday, in the not-too-distant future, responsibility for the Everglades would pass on to them. They would become the guardians and protectors of the only Everglades in the world, helping this wild and wonderful place go on forever.